Story 1. They never change their opinions or accept other points of view. Story 2. The ability to feel personally attacked by physical reality when it does not follow their desires. Story 3. The inability or unwillingness to engage in hypothetical scenarios. Story 4. It is far from a rule, but I often notice that people who think they are the smartest are usually the loudest. People who do not think they are very smart or who consider themselves average are often quite brilliant. That is only my personal observation. I have not met all 10 billion people on Earth yet, though I have been meaning to. Story 5. Maybe not that hidden, but when you try to explain something and they give up rather than ask questions about what you said. To use a specific kind of stupid, you need to connect your headphones via Bluetooth. They say, I don't know how to do that, instead of asking, how do I do that? Note: several people have said the two sentences in the last line are the same. I know they can be the same depending on tone. A resigned, well, I don't know how to do that sounds more natural to my ear than, well, I can't learn that. But I meant them the same way. Story 6. Extremely rigid thinking and a consistently dismissive attitude toward details are strong indicators. Story 7. I have not noticed many people hiding their lack of knowledge. They seem to wear their ignorance proudly. Story 8. Unbridled happiness. Seriously, some of my least intelligent acquaintances are among the happiest people I know, while many highly educated people seem miserable. Ignorance truly is bliss. Story 9. The inability to recognize patterns, even simple ones such as understanding that a plus B equals C. Story 10. They become angry very easily over insignificant things. Story 11. They have a hard time operating in a hypothetical context. Story 12. Making fun of someone who reads or uses actual vocabulary words highlights the mocker's own insecurities. Story 13. Buying a General Motors Company Sierra 2500 for daily grocery runs in a city. Story 14. Usually when people are dumb, there is nothing subtle about it. Story 15. Following trends blindly. Ego and superficiality. Can do small talk all the time but cannot have a real conversation. Seeking approval. Associating unrelated things. Speaking only one language and struggling to speak it properly. Lack of discipline and control over emotions. Being unhealthy and making excuses for it. Story 16. They do not read. For example, you can send emails, texts, and so on, and they will ask a question that was clearly answered in a post, text message, or email. They also ignore signs that clearly state information and then get upset about issues that would not have occurred if they had read the posted information. Story 17. They ask questions that can be easily answered with a simple internet search. Story 18. Their decisions are driven by emotion rather than by logic. You would expect this from a baby or an early teenager, but an adult should be beyond that. Story 19. They believe other working-class people are their enemies and that billionaires care about them. Story 20. They never ask questions or admit when they don't know something. They just fake it constantly. Story 21. They keep repeating the same mistakes, not because they do not care but because they do not learn from them. Story 22. They base their opinions on what is popular at the moment and do not use critical thinking. Story 23. When their only personality trait is correcting others, they are still wrong. Story 24. Ignorance of the world, a refusal to grow and learn, and a lack of empathy for others are concerning. Just because someone is older and cannot spell certain words or do basic arithmetic does not mean they are dumb. They probably have not learned it yet. An unwillingness to learn is what makes a person dumb. Story 25. Genuinely believing that asylum seekers, immigrants, and lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people are the cause of our problems, rather than a convenient distraction from wealth inequality cruelly exploited by the very rich and powerful. Story 26. They believe everything they hear instead of examining it. Story 27. If they have a pulse, we are all human and can be both foolish and intelligent. Story 28. They never update their opinions even when presented with clear evidence that they are wrong. Story 29. They wear a red hat that says "Make America Great Again." Story 30. They cannot grasp that correlation does not equal causation. Story 31. Not wanting to learn is different. Not knowing something is not dumb. That is being uneducated, and someone who is uneducated can fix that. Someone who is dumb will not even notice it. Story 32. Cults. My 60-something sibling is into many things but almost always in cultish ways. Whether the latest is Buc-ee's or Yeti, they say it is the greatest thing ever. Story 33. Cannot accept criticism or change their stance when presented with proven facts. Story 34. Over the last few years, I have begun to notice that a large number of very stupid people have been wearing red hats here in the United States. Maybe that is an indicator? Story 35. They keep using increasingly flowery intellectual-sounding words that mean the same thing without ever answering the question. Story 36. Incompetent people do not usually hide that they are incompetent. Anyone who uses ChatGPT to write their text and then sends a work email, a grant application, or similar without editing the language is being foolish. I oppose artificial intelligence on ethical grounds, but I concede that it can be useful to people who want to be lazy. However, it is embarrassing to receive messages that are clearly generated by artificial intelligence. You did not edit the tone or do anything to make the content seem human. Everyone who notices this, including me, feels insulted because you did not put in the effort to communicate. This is highly inappropriate professionally and especially publicly. Many readers will instantly recognize content generated by artificial intelligence. There are two people at my job who do this. Both are in management and public-facing roles and are my superiors, and I am frustrated that I have to edit their artificial intelligence-generated content so our company does not appear lazy and careless. The tool only enables their laziness because I am left to clean up the mess. Story 37. Do they know the difference? There. Story 38. They interrupt mid-sentence, assuming they already know what you'll say. Story 39. The lower the pants, the lower the intelligence quotient. I hate people who sag. Story 40. They make less than $50,000 a year and they vote conservatively. Story 41. Anyone who says all politicians are the same and smugly acts as if they are above it usually has no idea how the government actually works. Story 42. People who brag about never reading books are flexing their illiteracy. Story 43. Frequent reposting of questions previously asked on the AskReddit subreddit. Story 44. They blame immigrants for every problem they bring upon themselves. Downvotes from the uninformed. Story 45. They are unwilling to change their minds or admit they are wrong. Combine that with their usual belief that louder equals smarter, and you have it. Story 46. Inability or unwillingness to engage in nuanced thinking. The easiest examples are topics like abortion, transgender people, and Palestine, which are hot-button issues. Very few things in the world are truly binary. When people offer commentary and shut down discussions that acknowledge any nuance in decision-making, it is a red flag. Story 47. They're unable to tell the difference between their, and their. Story 48. Oh, that we lived in a society where people would bother to hide their stupidity. Story 49. I don't need to research or study a topic. I have critical thinking skills and will just magically come to a conclusion about it. Story 50. I know someone. We are both Canadians. She cannot tell the difference between United States and Canadian laws and histories. For example, she complains that her Second Amendment rights are being threatened, even though Canada does not have the Second Amendment. She recently fell for a scam from a caller claiming to be from United Healthcare in the United States because the caller said, "We are cheaper than the Affordable Care Act." She believed it because Canadians are not eligible for and do not need the Affordable Care Act due to universal health care. She also voided her ballot by mistake during the last Canadian federal election because she did not understand that we vote for our Member of Parliament, not directly for Prime Minister, and that write-in candidates are not a thing here. She wrote in Pierre Poilievre, who was not a candidate in her riding, voiding her ballot and later claiming it was a conspiracy against him. Story 51. Many people do not seem to understand the difference between woman and women. I bought this from a woman at the farmer's market. Why is singular versus plural so hard for people? Story 52. They say they do not want a raise because it puts them in a higher tax bracket. Story 53. Acting as if they already know everything and denying the possibility of learning anything new. Story 54. Doing the same thing repeatedly while expecting a different result is not a definition of crazy. It is a manifestation of stupidity. Story 55. A hidden sign is that a person believes they are too smart, does not accept advice, fails to learn from mistakes, and continues to speak as if they know everything. Story 56. They vehemently claim to be on one side of a political party in the United States. Story 57. The main one I can think of is a lack of curiosity. People who are not interested in learning anything are content with incompetence. I do not agree that many examples listed here are definite signs of being unintelligent. However, a lack of desire to learn is the key example. Story 58. People who do not take responsibility for their mistakes and never critique themselves. Story 59. They supported Biden and Harris and masturbated to Schumer, Pelosi, and Clinton. Story 60. They accept whatever is fed to them on television, especially news that portrays people negatively and distorts the narrative. Story 61. Dumb people don't hide their lack of intelligence. Ignorant people scream about how smart they are. Story 62. They believe white people are responsible for all of humanity's problems. Story 63. When challenged, they attack the person, not the argument. Story 64. They think being loud means being right in every argument. Story 65. One clear indicator is when someone never asks questions. They just talk at you instead of with you. It is not that they are trying to be rude. It seems it never occurs to them that they might not know something. Story 66. They cannot even begin to see the other side of an argument they disagree with. Unfortunately, I described 99% of political discourse on Reddit. Story 67. They never admit they are wrong, hate you for no reason, reject science, and attack you when you mildly disagree with their opinions. So 90% of Reddit users? Story 68. They think other dumb people are smart. If they think Joe Rogan or Trump is smart, they are dumb. Story 69. They say, I'm good at multitasking, then spill coffee, forget what they were doing, and text the wrong person at the same time. Story 70. Some people cannot admit they are ignorant. If we are too proud to admit ignorance, we will learn nothing. People who do not read also fail to learn. Story 71. I have never seen a smart right-winger, except for the politicians and billionaires who manipulate those people for personal gain, even though it is disgusting to do so. Story 72. They use personal insults when confronted with hard evidence against their views. Story 73. Believing that people who disagree with them are dumb or wrong, especially in politics, when many issues are simply matters of opinion. Story 74. People who bring politics into every conversation. Hey, let's go get a hamburger from that restaurant. Yeah, let's go ahead and support those capitalist fat cats at McDonald's. You know they don't pay their people fairly. Story 75. Wearing a red hat with Make America Great Again on it. Story 76. Thinking that anything someone does not personally understand or see the point of as stupid or worthless is the most ignorant way to view the world. Story 77. They think they know everything. They can't admit they are wrong. They are in a cult. Story 78. Addresses a room full of generals to tell them how little they know about warfare. Story 79. Watching Joe Rogan's podcast and accepting it as a legitimate source of political or scientific information. Story 80. They treat service workers like garbage for no reason. An instant red flag. Story 81. You use profanity frequently when conversing with people, inserting expletives into ordinary conversation. I have never met an intelligent person who did this. Story 82. Being poor while also being a Republican in the year 2025. Story 83. This is not a guaranteed indicator, but if I hear someone is religious, it makes me think they are dumb. They could be an Ivy League professor with an intelligence quotient of 150 or higher, and I would still think they are an idiot. Story 84. Cannot spell basic words or structure simple sentences. Relies on Grammarly for all communication. Story 85. I don't think I'm qualified to answer this. My intelligence quotient is likely only slightly higher than average, so I'm just one small mistake away from becoming dumb, laughing out loud. Story 86. Being unable to communicate vocally is the definition of the word dumb. However, not using precise language can indicate low intelligence. Story 87. It cannot be a coincidence that directly below this post there is one in which a person asks about the cheapest way to buy the new iPhone. I will go with that one. Story 88. Asking inappropriate questions at the wrong time. Not even questions that are not safe for work, just ill-timed ones. Note: I give people with social disorders a pass because they at least have an explanation regardless of intelligence. Story 89. Using mute point instead of moot point. That's a good one. Like, why even try? Story 90. Did you see this headline? They proceed to talk about a story based solely on the headline. I've been guilty of this. I'll be too busy at work to read a full article, so I'll say it's interesting and send it to a friend who has time to read it in full. Story 91. I read a really good quote in a YouTube comment the other day. It went, "Ignorance is not knowing how to do the right thing, but people can learn to do better. Stupidity is not knowing how to do the right thing, but also refusing to learn to do better. We are all ignorant of something. Nobody knows everything, but we can always learn. Some people will stumble at that part." Story 92. Sorry, I cannot assist with content that demeans people with disabilities. Here is a neutral alternative suitable for text-to-speech. I am not sure. I think most indicators are fairly obvious. You can sometimes notice it on a person's face. There is a particular expression some people show. It is a bit hard to describe, but you may notice a lack of engagement in their eyes. They may seem to be present without actively participating. It can become more noticeable in conversation when they appear not to recognize or engage with what is being said. Story 93. Not understanding the difference between correlation and causation. Story 94. The way their facial features react when you speak or when they move their lips while reading. Story 95. Using buzzwords to appear to understand what you're saying or the instructions. Story 96. Definitely not the asshole. I think it is so awesome that you want to sell it to someone who will really enjoy it. Much respect to you. Story 97. Sometimes sending people away can be the mature response. But some people nod in a way that signals they are unwilling to discuss the matter, even in response to something that is objectively true, although they are the uninformed party. Story 98. It is when they try to act as if they are the smartest person in the room, talking down to others. I always think someone is dumb when they try to prove how smart they are. Story 99. They assume abstract and complex ideas such as good and evil neatly fit into their worldview. For example, if someone is a particular race, they are evil. If someone belongs to a particular political party, they are ignorant. Story 100. They use cliches and catchphrases constantly. Their thinking is rigid and almost calcified. No new information gets in once they have decided what they believe. Belief, not reality, sustains them. Story 101. People mix up their and their, where, were, and we're, and your and your. They could be dyslexic, and I might be unkind. Story 102. He speaks loudly while claiming to know everything. He also surrounds himself with other idiots. Story 103. The types of questions a person asks are a good indication of the depth of their understanding and their self-awareness. There is such a thing as a dumb question, but the people most worried about asking one are often the least likely to ask one. When I guide a coworker through a process I am skilled in and they are new to, I get worried when they do not ask questions and simply say gotcha repeatedly. I also worry when they ask questions they ought to know the answers to. I do not mind being asked many questions. Why questions are much more encouraging than what is that questions. There is a way to ask a question you should know the answer to without sounding foolish. For example, forgive me if this is a basic question, but when you say X, do you mean doing ABC? Even if you are wrong, you show that you understand something and give the other person a basis for a response. A thoughtful person will phrase it this way. Someone less thoughtful will just ask what X is and not indicate what help they need, so you cannot tell whether they do not know what a feline is or whether they do not know what an animal is. Story 104. Wearing loafers without socks and pastel-colored shorts from Macy's. Story 105. Asking for help, then saying they are doing it right when they are not, which is basically being in denial. Story 106. Well, that is not dumb. It is often due to learning difficulties, poor processing skills, or simply having less education than others. Story 107. Touching one's lips with one's fingers on public transport. Story 108. No light behind the eyes. If you do not know what that means. Story 109. They try to excuse their behavior in meetings by citing a blog post written by someone who misunderstood a type of psychological research. Self-assigned neurodivergence does not automatically make you an asset on a team that requires substantial expertise and experience in a particular topic area. Your ideas are not abstract or far out. They are entirely unrelated to what we're trying to accomplish and indicate that you lack knowledge of the topic. Story 110. They won't change their minds about something they are wrong about, no matter what evidence is presented to them. Story 111. If indicators are hidden, how can we know whether a person is dumb? These answers reflect what we consider dumb things people do or think privately but do not share or articulate to others. Otherwise, they would be apparent indicators. Story 112. Smart people do not marry or even long-term date dumb people. Story 113. Name calling. You can argue your point, ignore the other person's point, or say that you disagree. Name calling means you have lost the argument. Story 114. Treating every response as a hidden indicator that you do not like the political environment. Story 115. Dumbness is usually not hidden very well, in my experience. Most hidden dumbness I have noticed is when someone stubbornly chooses the most difficult method, extra steps and processes, doing one task at a time. The process looks like a mess of mental convolutions and circuitous thinking. I've seen this in professional kitchens. The so-called genius cook will take half of his shift using every dish and tool in the kitchen to make tortilla chips and still strut around like a peacock about his supposed culinary prowess, while nothing else can get done because he has taken up all the workspace and is in the way. Yes, Jeff, I'm talking about you. Go cry by the dumpster while you finally take the garbage out. Or is that too many things at once for you to handle? Single-tasking asshole. Laughing out loud. Story 116. Physiognomy rarely lies. They have a low intelligence quotient look about them. They have poor oral hygiene with white residue caked between their teeth. They often appear unintelligent when they speak. Story 117. Not knowing that pathetic and prophetic have different meanings. Story 118. They speak in a monolithic way. Their identity is not their own but a prepackaged, copy and pasted persona. It immediately discredits you as a serious person in my eyes. Be your own person and have your own thoughts. Story 119. They continued their line of questioning with their assumptions intact and did not factor in the new information they were being given. For example, I had a conversation just like this last weekend. Person. What are those video home system tapes on your stairs? Are you getting rid of them? Me, no. I'm taking them to my brother's because he bought a video cassette recorder. Person. Looks at the tapes. Hey, I remember this movie. It was great. Why would you get rid of this? Me. I'm taking them to my brother's because he has a video cassette recorder and we are going to rewatch the tapes together. Person, you know you should not get rid of these tapes. They might be worth something to a collector or if you put them on eBay. Me, okay. But I'm not getting rid of them. Person, oh. Then why are they on your stairs? Story 120. People who assume they know which hidden indicators prove that someone is unintelligent. Story 121. I'm sure a hard reset would help. I don't own a General Motors company vehicle. I just know he complains about his truck quite a bit. Story 122. They cannot accept no for an answer and scream if they do not get what they want. Story 123. Make things sound more complicated than usual. There is no need for those words. I do not understand anything you said after that. Story 124. They regard something as a fact based on their own singular experience and emotion or belief. For example, if they are a lesbian, they may not believe that bisexual people exist. They can meet a perfectly normal bisexual person and still think that person is faking their identity. Story 125. Some people think being concise is a sign of intelligence and that verbosity shows a lack of it. That view is too black and white. A person can have excellent rhetoric, which indicates intelligence, yet lack depth. Someone may use many words, but if you listen closely, they often provide more context and nuance, making their point more accurate. Story 126. They think that a single personal anecdote invalidates statistical evidence. Story 127. They ask, what is a hidden indicator that someone is dumb? Story 128. Overly political and can only see one side, not the other. Story 129. Vacant stare. Does not listen to reason. Does not use logic or facts to support arguments. Is quick to anger. Story 130. They do not realize that their wife is always right, even when she is wrong. Story 131. I am the weekly person who asks this question on this subreddit. Story 132. The ratio of statements to questions is all wrong. Second, I tend to discuss concrete things rather than concepts or ideas. Also, you fail to see my undeniable cleverness. Story 133. Constantly bragging about their intelligence or angrily insisting they are right, even when they are easily proven wrong. Story 134. They make simple tasks more complicated by changing words and adding extra steps. Refer to military doctrine. Story 135. They don't know the difference between your, and y'all need Jesus. Story 136. When someone argues and raises their voice to be louder than the other person, believing it makes them more right. Story 137. I do not know if it is a sign of being dumb, but I cannot stand people who cannot spell. It literally takes 2 seconds to look up how to spell something or the difference between your and you are. There is autocorrect everywhere, so I do not understand it. Story 138. When they think speaking louder makes their weak argument sound correct. Story 139. Interrupts when a knowledgeable person is speaking about their area of expertise. Story 140. When someone endlessly talks about themselves and it turns out they authored something like this: skill 1 plus skill 2 plus skill 3 and so on up to skill number n equals athletic performance magnitude. Story 141. They are quick to anger, not open to suggestions that differ from their own opinion, make fun of people and are cruel for no reason other than to try to make themselves look good, talk over others, lack empathy and common sense, and are mean to animals. Story 142. People who pride themselves on being smarter than others very rarely are. Story 143. They are slow on the uptake, so you sit and watch it dawn on them like a rising flush. Story 144. They overestimate their intellectual abilities, boast frequently, and believe others are less intelligent than they are. Story 145. Does not reevaluate a belief or decision when presented with new information. Story 146. I feel that Edward Norton does a great job showcasing many of the signs in Glass Onion. Story 147. When people keep doing the same thing and expect a different result. Story 148. They use applications like Robinhood to invest in the stock market. That application is a game compared to professional stock trading and investing. Story 149. Adding an apostrophe to a plural word incorrectly, thereby making it possessive. Story 150. They ask questions on Reddit such as, what is a hidden indicator that someone is unintelligent? Story 151. I manage a lot of people who can't be bothered to think for themselves. I'll be out of the shop and receive a text saying, X doesn't work. They should try a quick diagnostic before bothering me off the clock, such as turning it off and on. Story 152. People who feel compelled to share their opinions in every conversation and believe they are experts on the topic. Story 153. I know someone who is highly vocal about politics. They admit they have never voted and refuse to vote. Story 154. People, events, ideas. My opinion: if I meet people who are focused only on people and do not think in terms of events or, especially, ideas. Story 155. A person who responds to any logical argument or different viewpoint by saying, I know what I know. Story 156. If you believe the first woman was made from a man's rib, that there was a talking snake, or that a virgin became pregnant by a spirit, you get the idea. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.